to introduce our panelists and also myself. So I am Laura Brittner. I'm a faculty here in the School of Sustainability at Loyola University. And my panelists here include, I'm going to go in reverse order of they're going to each present, and then I will ask them some questions, then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So we have Anna Jentz, who is with us from Greenprint Partners, and she is a climate equity planner there. Anna is one of our own alumna, and she has been at Greenprint Partners working on a planning team on projects nationwide and also locally in the Calumet region, which we're going to hear a little bit about today. And her work includes conducting research and data analysis, writing technical reports and grant proposals, and engaging with community members about their water and greening infrastructure projects. And she's currently at the UIC getting her master's in urban planning. And then we will also be hearing from Kate Avasic, who is a program lead in climate resilience at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And as the climate resilience program lead for CMAP, which is the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Kate focuses on increasing regional resilience to climate change and preserving one of the region's greatest assets, its fresh water. Her work advances climate resilience through stakeholder coordination, data analysis, policy development, and long-range planning. Avasic manages two regional efforts, the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan for Northeastern Illinois and the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan for Greater Chicago. Kate Avasic holds a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Illinois at Chicago and a Bachelor of Arts in Geography from Westchester University in Pennsylvania. And then our first presenter today is Deborah Shore, who is has just left her position as the regional administrator for Region 5 of the US EPA. She served in this role since October of 21, is that right? Yeah. And in this role under President Biden, she was appointed to oversee Region 5, which includes Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Wisconsin, and 36 tribal nations. And in that role, she oversaw the agency with a $2.5 billion budget, 1,100 scientists, attorneys, and emergency responders, project managers, and many others working to protect public health and the environment. She also was on the board of commissioners for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District for 3 terms and oversaw our whole water reclamation region from Chicago River and Lake Michigan as well. And as an award-winning author, Shore is the founder of the Chicago Wilderness magazine, which many of you might be familiar with, and led the Regional Conservation Consortium Chicago Wilderness and founded Friends of the Forest Preserves, which maybe many of you have volunteered with. So with that introduction, I would like to welcome Deborah up with our first presentation.
Thank you. I'm old is what it means. Thank you, Loyola, and thank you to longtime friend and leader Nancy Tuckman for this invitation to be with you today. And thanks for all of you for sticking out through a number of really interesting and gnarly sessions that have preceded this one. I thought it might help to give a little bit of history. Many of you may know this already, but to understand better how we got to now, I think it'll help to understand a few things about our water history. So our water story here begins about 15 or 16,000 years ago, when where we are now was under about half a mile of ice. The last glacier extended this far south, a little further south, but not much more than that. And so imagine the weight of half a mile of ice sitting over where we are now. And a friend who was an illustrator tried to show how high that would be. And that ice pressing on the landscape compressed the soils, and as that glacier receded, slowly moving back and forth and grinding the soils, leaving glacial ridges and moraines, leaving giant ice cubes that created prairie potholes as they melted, leaving an enormously rich mix of soils from which we have globally significant biological diversity here at the southern tip of Lake Michigan. And what this image shows is that eastern continental divide, which separates the Lake Michigan watershed on the east from the Mississippi River watershed on the west. And so all the rain that falls on the east side of that divide makes its way into rivers and streams and replenishes Lake Michigan. All the rain falling on the west side makes its way into rivers and streams that ultimately join the Mississippi and empty out into the Gulf of Mexico. And in this image, you see these dark splotches by the coast, by the shoreline of Lake Michigan. That's pollution, because as Chicago was growing in the mid-1800s, people dumped all manner of human and animal and industrial waste into the Chicago River that flowed into the lake, the source of their drinking water then and now. Not a good idea to put raw sewage into your drinking water, and people were getting sick. And the city fathers thought, what can we do? We can't have people come to live here if there's not a safe source of drinking water. So, and this shows this sort of soggy, wet, flattish area on the east side of that divide, where when it rained, there were a lot of wetlands. Skokie is the native word for marsh. And then the drop off towards the other watershed. And they came up with a notion of digging a canal between the south branch of the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River and reversing the river so that the water, the waste would no longer flow into the lake but would flow away from the lake, protecting the drinking water. It's been said that all problems started out as solutions. Remember that. The solution to the problem of Chicago's contaminated drinking water was to dig a canal, reverse a river, and it worked. I would submit it allowed Chicago to become a great and thriving metropolis. But it also connected two watersheds that weren't connected naturally. And it became a highway for environmental havoc, for invasive species to move in both directions between the lake and the Mississippi. So here you see these artificial connections with the Sanitary and Ship Canal, later the Cal-Sag Channel on the south, and then the North Shore Channel, all dug to convey human wastes using the river and the lake water to flush it away from the lake. And then as Chicago grew, you see on the left, an image of an area in Des Plaines in 1940, and then 60 years later, same area, but very built out. We started building and then paving over the landscape. And it's, by some estimates, 42% of Cook County is now impervious surface. What does that mean? It means we've taken away the land's ability to absorb water and to infiltrate it. And we now have a lot of runoff. And we're also now experiencing, as you've heard over and over, more intense rain events. What that means is a lot more rain concentrated in a short period of time. And it's less predictable and highly intense. Some of you may recall some summers ago a popular event called the Ice Bucket Challenge, where people were dumping a bucket of ice right over someone's head to raise money for a worthy cause. Well, these storms are like that. They're so intense, but highly localized. And what this shows is the duration of a storm in Oak Lawn in 2014. And you see that in the space of about an hour, there were 4.5 inches that hit in that area. And our sewer systems just weren't built to be able to accommodate that kind of intense short time flow. And so this is what we're seeing over and over and over in 2014, in 2018, in 2024, and 2023, big floods around our region that are causing a lot of damage and a lot of heartburn and so on. I live in a fairly modest single-family home in Skokie, and this is what's happening on my block. The upper image is a home built in the early 1950s. It was torn down, and the bottom image is the home that replaced it. And it occupies a larger footprint on that same lot. It's just a bigger home, and that larger footprint means it's displacing more water into the same size pipes that were laid down the middle of the street to capture the wastewater from our homes and the stormwater from our streets. It's a combined sewer. And so we were able to take a look at that larger footprint. This is an aerial look, and there's a calculation, a runoff coefficient you can use to see how much is going to be displaced from a roof or a driveway or a parking lot. And so this expansion on that same lot is now displacing 50,000 more gallons in a year. And there are 4 such teardowns on my block alone. So if you think about it, there's 200,000 more gallons a year, roughly, going into that same size sewer pipe. And it's not distributed evenly over the course of a year. It's intensely during these rainstorms. So one other thing, some of you may have heard me tell a story when I was running for office about my driveway. This is our home, though now there's a mini oak savanna in the front yard. We ripped up the grass, but we calculated the area of our driveway and what the runoff would be, and it's between 9,000 and 10,000 gallons a year that runs into the street, collects salt and oil and contaminants, goes into the sewer, is mixed with wastewater from our homes. It's sent to a wastewater treatment plant where it's treated, and then we send that to the Gulf of Mexico. How smart is that? How sustainable is that? So I wanted to see, what does 10,000 gallons a year look like? And this is what it looks like, 20 and then 30, from one driveway. And then we measured our roof, and we figured out, just 2 of us living there, what our annual water use is and what the runoff from our roof and driveway are. And that if we could capture and store and then treat and use what nature delivers free of charge directly to our doorstep, it would come to 124% of our annual water use. But we don't have the capacity to store it and treat it and meet public health standards and so on. So I want to talk about some work by a group called the First Street Foundation. It's a nonprofit that does a lot of really excellent research. And they've been looking at climate risk assessments, both from flooding and from other things. And they've been developing some highly sophisticated models to determine the risks of floods, wildfires, and so on with property-specific information. And they have been focusing on what they call pluvial flooding. What that means is from rain, not the overbank flooding from streams and rivers due to storms, but what we're seeing in our cities and suburbs, both from aging infrastructure, which can't accommodate these intense rains, and from impervious surface and climate change. And their model is much more granular than the FEMA flood maps. And as a result, they think the risks are about 1.7 times more than what the FEMA maps show. So this image, they are now able to, these are blocks on a map that have already been affected by this pluvial flooding. And look at where we are in the Midwest. And their work is available online. I would recommend that all of you look it up. They also did some analysis of what are the fast growing counties where a lot of people are moving to, but that also have a large share of what they call climate abandonment areas. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you look, the second one there is Will County, just south of us, because its population is growing, but the conditions there mean that they're going to see a lot of flooding. And by climate abandonment areas, First Street looked at where are the places people are experiencing flooding and have already been moving away, those people who can, because of repeated floods. And then they projected, using climate data, where are the areas that people are likely to leave in the future. And so this is a map of what they call new climate abandonment areas. And again, 3 of the top 10 counties forecasted to have the largest increase in climate abandonment areas are in what was EPA's Region 5. 2 are in Minnesota, Hennepin and Ramsey County. That's where Minneapolis and St. Paul are. And number 5th is Milwaukee County in Wisconsin. And the reason I think this is important to think about, and this is an image from one of their reports from Staten Island, but you see a home in 2008, and then it had been flooded and flooded and flooded, and finally they just tore it down in 2013. If people are leaving, the people who leave, and by the way, First Street Foundation now has this by census tract data. You can look up individual census tracts and look at their risk and the projections. But what it means is that those who can leave will, and those who can't will stay. And those may be elderly, infirm, or people who just aren't able to move. But think about what that means for municipalities. Property values may decrease, revenues from property taxes will decrease, needs for social services may increase, and many municipalities will be facing this real crunch. And so First Street Foundation estimates that 3.2 million people have already left climate abandonment areas, but another 7.5 million are projected to leave. Now, I think we are going to see climate migration into our cities on the Great Lakes states because of our access to fresh water. But what it means is those people moving here will probably go to higher ground or safer places, and not these lower ground, frequently flooded places. So what do we do locally? I think we need to think more and more about a distributed network of rain capture systems, using every tool we can, green infrastructure, smaller but storage systems, but bigger than rain barrels, cisterns and repurposed rail tank cars. This shows an image of a neighborhood in Calumet City. This is from the Water Reclamation District, identifying vacant parcels where there might be localized storage of rainwater or rain gardens built, things like that. And the MWRD is now doing an analysis by watersheds, and this can be done by sub-watershed or sub-basin, of looking with GIS layers, how much impervious surface is there, what are they seeing in terms of flooding, and what's the gap between their ability to store and detain and deal with what they're seeing and what they have. So I think there's enormous opportunity right here in Cook County to peel back some of that concrete skin we've laid over the landscape, to give restore the land's ability to capture and absorb water and infiltrate it and recharge our underground aquifers, but also to be really innovative in block by block or neighborhood solutions to capturing rain. So I know you'll have questions later, but thank you for your time today.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Kate Vasic, and I'm a program lead for climate resilience at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. I'm really excited to be here. I've really enjoyed the presentations that I've heard so far, and I want to share a little bit about the work that CMAP is advancing in the climate resilience space, predominantly focused on transportation. Okay, so first I want to share just a little bit about CMAP and where we work. CMAP is the Comprehensive Regional Planning Organization and Metropolitan Planning Organization for Northeastern Illinois, which is a mouthful. But this basically means that we're responsible for creating a vision for the region's future with an emphasis on long-term transportation infrastructure projects. And then we oversee the use of federal transportation dollars to ensure that we're moving toward that vision. And that vision is outlined in the region's long-range comprehensive plan called On to 2050. Just a little bit about the office. We have about 120 people on staff, and we work out of the recently renovated old post office in the Loop. So we serve the entire region of northeastern Illinois. This is a very large area, as I'm sure a lot of you know. It's home to 8.6 million people who live across 7 counties and 284 separate municipalities. The region also covers a lot of land, over 4,000 square miles, which is twice the size of the state of Delaware. And the region isn't just home to a lot of people. We also have a lot of infrastructure too, as we've been talking about. Infrastructure in roads, pipes, as well as houses, other buildings. Northeastern Illinois, though, is a national transportation hub for roads, rail, and aviation. And so that is a big focus of our work. Our region's interdependence is affected by challenges that don't recognize neighborhood or municipal or county lines. We are all affected one way or another by freight congestion, traffic fatalities, poor air quality, and of course, impacts from climate change. So no one municipality or county can solve these issues, especially when the resources are so scarce and limited. These regional issues really require collaboration and coordination, both to identify solutions and then to fund them. So CMAP works to tackle these regional challenges through data analysis, policy and plan development, setting prioritization goals for funding infrastructure, and creating spaces for regional dialogue. CMAP's climate work doesn't just touch on transportation, but it is a major focus of our work, especially right now. And this is because just as climate change is affecting every facet of our life, it also has significant impacts to our transportation infrastructure, service, and users, and that means all of us. It does this first by reducing system safety and function. Flooded roads, tracks, bridges, viaducts, it makes it difficult for people to safely get to where they need to go, which increases traffic congestion as well as causing safety issues. It also weakens the infrastructure from the added stress that comes with frequent and prolonged flooding or extreme temperatures. Climate change also impacts system costs and the economy at large. Weakened infrastructure means higher maintenance costs, and this comes at a time when we already have significant gaps in funding to rebuild and replace our infrastructure. Delays and disruptions also come at a cost from reducing worker productivity, tourism opportunities, and causing disruptions to the supply chain, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And this is especially important considering the Chicago region's role as a national freight hub. These disruptions also impact access to essential services and emergency vehicles. This is problematic in the city, but especially in more rural areas that could be cut off during a flood and leaving fewer alternate routes or options to switch to other transportation modes like transit. And of course, I can't not mention the reality that we're facing here, that continued emissions from transportation as well as all other sources in our lives and in our economy will continue to fuel climate change, which will make it more difficult for all of the work that we're talking about, for all of us to adapt to this new future. The goalpost keeps getting pushed farther and farther out. So we must continue to push forward on efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So to address these impacts, one thing that CMAP is doing is collaborating with partners across northeastern Illinois to develop the first ever Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, which will identify opportunities to improve the resilience of the transportation network to extreme weather and climate change impacts. Developing this plan will help us take steps towards, of course, building a more resilient transportation system, but in return, more resilient communities that are better equipped to withstand the storms that we experience today and those that we will experience in the future. And although funding opportunities are definitely uncertain at this time, the plan will still position the region to be able to take advantage of funding sources for climate resilience and flood mitigation and heat reduction to make much needed improvements. But first, what does transportation resilience really mean? We've been talking a lot about flooding and continued impacts. And, resilience, climate resilience doesn't mean that the hazard is going to go away. We can't build our way out of this situation. We need to learn how to adapt and put measures in place to adapt. And so considering all the changes that we're experiencing today and that scientists tell us that we can expect to experience in the future, it's the ability of, in this case, our transportation system to be able to anticipate and prepare for and adapt to those changing conditions. And then, following the flood, be able to recover rapidly from disruptions. The crux of this work is really that we have to change the way that we're designing our infrastructure so that we're accounting for conditions that we expect to see over the full lifespan of a road, a bridge, or train track. Not the conditions that we've seen in the past, and that's historically and still today how we design infrastructure. So in this image here, you can see how water levels might be well below the bridge deck when the project is planned, designed, and constructed. This is on the left-hand side of this graphic. But as we move forward further to the right into the future, toward the end of the bridge's design service life, we can already see the water starting to overtop the bridge deck. So whether you're talking about sea level rise or inland flooding, the point still remains. If we are expecting that the infrastructure we build today will serve us for decades to come, we must consider those future conditions. So the ways that CMAP is really focused on increasing resilience through this plan is first identifying and prioritizing those major transportation assets in the region that are vulnerable to extreme weather and climate change. And this is what I'm going to focus on today because it's where we are in the project process. But then we want to use that information to help identify and prioritize infrastructure investments to build resilience and reduce risks. We want to ensure that the investments and the other improvements that we propose in the plan drive equitable and just outcomes in communities that are both overburdened by climate impacts, including flooding, and underserved by the transportation system. And then finally, we must inform the process by which transportation projects get developed, designed, and funded so that they actively build resilience and contribute to the solution. We've been hard at work assessing the vulnerability of the regional transportation system to climate change, and this involves 5 key analyses. First, we looked at recent trends and latest climate projections to understand what climate change will look like in our region. Second, we examined at a system level what components of the transportation system are most likely to be impacted by climate-related events. Then we took a deeper dive. We used data to score transportation assets for risk to flooding, and in some cases extreme heat, so we could identify where these assets and risks are distributed across the region. And then finally, we looked more closely at heat impacts. I realize that this is an event focused on water, but this was important. We looked at heat impacts to transit riders to try to identify locations or routes where riders are at greatest risk. And we're also focused on the economic impacts and really trying to add to the quantification of the cost of inaction so that we can really help provide much needed justification for continued investment. To take a little bit of a deep dive into the risk assessment, you could use this risk assessment to assess not just transportation infrastructure, other infrastructure, and other assets. What we did was we measured risk and assigned a score based on two things: exposure to the climate hazard, and then the criticality of the asset. In this case, for flood risk, we have flood exposure. It made up 60% of our score, and it was based on projected future flooding, as well as data that we were able to compile on past flood locations. And then we wanted to look at criticality too. This made up 40% of our score. Half of that was based on income and other factors that make a person more socially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And the other half of the score was based on data related to how important that asset is to the overall system. So does it serve a bus route? Is it a truck route? Does it provide access to job centers and hospitals and other critical facilities? So I just want to conclude here with some of our findings from this assessment. First off, no surprise here, everyone said it so far, flooding's our biggest challenge in the region, both now and in the future. And just as we found with other flood studies, it's impacting our most urban areas the most. Looking at roads a little bit more, to the extent that you can see it on this map, the map is showing roads that are ranking high and very high risk for flooding. And that means that they could experience up to 2 or more feet of flooding during a 500-year flood event by 2050, the big storms that we have seen in recent years. Cook County has the highest percentage of high or very high risk roads at 44%. And then you can see other clusters, including in Chicago, suburban Cook, as well as the cities of Aurora, Elgin, Joliet, and Waukegan. But I like to point out that this is really a regional problem too. It's a suburban problem, and it's also an issue in our more rural areas. Briefly to touch on heat, extreme heat will become more of an increasing threat. And related to transportation, this is especially important for system operations, for anyone who is walking or biking or rolling exposed to the elements. It's also going to be more of a hazard for our rail infrastructure, impacting our train service as well as freight. Climate models are showing that annual days with average temperatures over 95 degrees will increase from 2 days experienced historically to 18 days by 2050. And what this map shows is that the changes are going to be different depending on where you are in the region. The number of extremely hot days will increase the most in the central and the southwestern portions of the region, which are shown in the deeper shades of orange and brown. Again, another heat finding that I wanted to share here, though, we looked at how extreme heat would impact transit riders. And we wanted to focus on transit riders for 2 reasons. First, we know that heat doesn't impact people equally. And second, we know that transit riders are particularly more vulnerable because you're exposed to the elements when you're waiting for your train or you're waiting for your bus. And also, some riders really rely on transit to get to where they need to go. They have no other options. So to understand heat vulnerability, we looked at exposure to the extreme temperatures that I just shared on the previous slide. And then we also pulled in social and health vulnerability data, as well as conditions at bus stops and train stations like tree shade, as well as the wait times for the service. And when accounting for these risk factors, we found that more than half of bus stops and rail stations have high or very high transit rider vulnerability. Urban areas of the region demonstrate higher vulnerability, with higher concentrations on Chicago's south and west sides, as well as the south and west suburbs in Cook County, and again, cities of Aurora, Elgin, Joliet, and Waukegan. And this really aligns with some of the flood maps that we saw in the previous presentations, and generally long-standing inequities in marginalized and underinvested communities. I'll conclude with this. We've made all this data published, and so if you find, if you want to use it in your work, in some studies, we have it available here with this QR code. We also have a web map available and the report itself. So with that, thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I am very excited to be here today, in large part because, as mentioned, I'm a Loyola alum, so this is a fun full circle moment. Oh, thank you. I thought I'd bring some proof, just, go Ramblers. But currently, I work as an urban planner for a company called Greenprint Partners. We are a consulting firm specializing in community-centered environmental infrastructure, particularly in the water and urban greening spaces, which is a mouthful, so you're probably like, Anna, what does that even mean? Well, it means that a lot of the work I do is helping communities plan for, prioritize, and implement green stormwater infrastructure projects, or GSI. I think for anyone who might not know, GSI refers to stormwater management practices that aim to reduce the speed and volume of stormwater entering our sewer systems. And they do this by using plants and soils to allow rainwater to mimic those natural water cycles and infiltrate into the ground and be managed right where it falls. They help reduce runoff, manage stormwater, improve water quality, and then when that plant element in particular is involved, they help to have these additional co-benefits of attracting pollinators and creating new green space. So I'm excited to share today. I'm going to be a little more solutions focused. I'm excited to share about our work on the Rain Ready Implementation Initiative. For a bit of background, this project, back in 2022, Cook County made $6 million available in American Rescue Plan Act funding to implement GSI projects in these 6 communities of Blue Island, Calumet City, Calumet Park, Dalton, Riverdale, and Robbins. And the goal of this initiative is to implement community prioritized projects in accordance with the Rain Ready plan for the Calumet corridor. And that plan was developed back in the 2010s by our friends at the Center for Neighborhood Technology in close collaboration with community members like Cheryl over here. I think there was a Chatham one as well. So because we were starting from these sort of high-level plan document where the recommendations are put green streets in maybe these locations, and we only had $6 million, which sounds like it could be a lot of money, but in terms of capital infrastructure is really a drop in the bucket. We had to really boil down to a scale of projects that we could actually implement on. And so to do that, we worked really closely with resident steering committees in each of those 6 communities through this prioritization process. We had a series of 3 meetings where we talked about what GSI is, how it works, and the different typologies of GSI, and heard from residents on what they would like to see in their community, what type of GSI, what their priorities and goals were. And then we took all that information, some technical considerations from our engineers, and applied it to this big matrix to whittle it down to a short list of projects, which the communities then voted on to prioritize for outreach and implementation. A little bit more about what this looked like. We had 18 meetings across the 6 committees with about 90 residents in total participating. But I think really even more than those numbers, the real value of this was that these were spaces where community members could share their frustrations and the deep losses that they were and are experiencing due to urban flooding, both financial and emotional losses. And so our role in that was to provide that technical expertise, but even more so, I think, to be empathetic listeners, make sure people felt they were being heard. These were spaces where folks also had a chance to not feel so alone and were able to share their stories with each other. And even though the scale of the chronic flooding that these communities are facing compared to the amount of funding and what we could do is a bit of a mismatch, we were able to have these really open, transparent dialogue and work through that together with these amazing humans that were showing up to these meetings. And I think there was a real sense of collectively working on a solution together that I just want to highlight about being so essential to infrastructure implementation is really involving the community members in decision-making processes every step of the way. A little bit about what we heard. I just want to highlight a few things. First and foremost is that residents want projects that solve the problem of urban flooding. We often talk about GSI in the context of its co-benefits and lead that way. But first and foremost for these residents is that their basements flood every time it rains. They've lost valuable memories. It's a financial burden, or they get 1 to 2, even 3 sometimes feet of standing water in their street and they can't leave their homes. Additionally, like many older communities, many of these communities have critical gray infrastructure deficiencies. Pipes are undersized, and despite being connected to MWRD's TARP system, they struggle to convey water to that system without backing up and causing flooding along the way. At the same time, residents express concerns about their local government's capacity to support infrastructure implementation and long-term maintenance. So while investment is needed to update infrastructure, many municipalities simply don't have the capacity to go after the grants and other streams of funding that are needed to support that investment. So we had to really balance all of those considerations in this process and have really open conversations about that to hear from residents, okay, all that considered, what do you want? What can we do? What would benefit you? And so I'm excited to share where we landed after all of those conversations. We had sort of 3 project bucket categories that emerge. Gap funding, where we're directly providing funds to help dollars go further to contractors that are already working on GSI projects in these communities. Design bid projects, where our awesome engineering team is designing and contracting to get these projects into the ground, hopefully this summer. And then a residential program that I will share more about. So our gap funding projects, we supported some green alleys in Blue Island and Calumet City, and then a green street in Calumet Park. As you can see, some of these are already in the ground. And then on the design bid side, our engineering team is actively working on these 3 projects. In Calumet City, we are designing stormwater bump outs at the intersection of Sibley and Wentworth Avenue. These will help to manage stormwater as well as have traffic calming benefits, so a fun transportation connection. And then in Calumet Park, we're working with Burr Oak Academy on a green schoolyard. And then in Robbins, we have this sidewalk stormwater management project that I'm gonna share a little bit more about as sort of like a case study example. This project was selected by the amazing Robbins Rain Ready Steering Committee, who picked it due to persistent ponding that has occurred in this area. This is on a good day. Our team, through site visits and investigations, found out that this ponding is due to the fact that this is an existing ditch system. So it's meant to convey and manage the stormwater because they don't have the traditional like pipe infrastructure we might see. But it has no outlet, so the water has nowhere to go, and so it just sits there, which is a problem for a couple of reasons, but some of the ones that the committee highlighted were that there's a senior center just to the north here. If you see that red building in the top photo there, that's where it is, and many of the residents there travel along this roadway to get to a nearby shopping center. But because of the flooding here, they have to walk in the street with cars going by really quickly, and that's of course a safety concern. Also, we heard that there's snakes here that have been seen. This was a repeated quote, snakes have been seen, and that was a key concern for a lot of the committee members, especially for any kids that might want to play in this open space. And so our team is working on this sidewalk project where we'll be installing a sidewalk with stormwater storage underneath that will help to allow some of that stormwater to better infiltrate into the ground. We'll also, though, be creating a connection between this system and the nearby tollway stormwater management system. So we'll give somewhere for that water to go. So this is obviously not a vegetated project, and we like our co-benefits, but the reason we went with a non-vegetated project was really in response to what we were hearing from the community members, that maintenance would just be too hard for the capacity of their local government. But we're excited to be partnering with ComEd on this project. This like the strip of land right there that you can see where this bottom arrow is pointing is ComEd right-of-way. And ComEd has an existing prairification program where they will be planting prairie plants in their right-of-ways. And so we're excited to be coordinating with them on that in alignment with this project and bring that vegetative element in, but with a partner who has the capacity and experience to be able to handle the maintenance while still providing those benefits to residents. And then our last category of projects was the residential retrofits program. This program was selected by the Riverdale and Dalton communities and is designed to prevent basement sewer backups while also helping to manage yard ponding. Both of these communities have combined sewer systems, which I think we've heard today, but means that the stormwater and wastewater are conveyed through the same pipes. And so when those systems become overwhelmed, the water needs somewhere to go, and it finds its way to go by backing up through pipes into people's homes, which is a major health concern. So our program is proposing we'll be installing overhead sewer lines that raise the pipes to a height that's above which the sewage can back up to prevent those backups from occurring, as well as pairing those with residential rain gardens and rain barrels in order to provide some level of yard ponding, stormwater management, but also really to improve familiarity with GSI as a concept and build that buy-in. So to sum this all up, I'm sure I'm over time, so I'll go quickly. I really just want to emphasize the value of bringing community members into the decision-making process. We're going to need to make massive investments in our infrastructure, and I think there's a real opportunity to do that in a way that deeply involves community and addresses past harms and disinvestment that has occurred. Continuing to show up is so important and really helps to build trusting relationships and foster a real partnership and sense of community ownership for these projects, because when people can see themselves in the decision-making process in the infrastructure projects, that helps to move the needle, even if slightly, in the direction of addressing past harms and disinvestment that have created those feelings of mistrust and extractive relationships in the first place. I think through this process, we can clearly see that it gives implementers a better sense of what is really needed. It sounds simple and crazy to be like, duh, obviously you should talk to people about what's needed, but that hasn't always happened. And in doing so in this process, we were able to, I think, better meet the needs of folks based on what we were hearing, because initially we were expecting a lot of vegetative projects, but we shifted more into these gray-green solutions and ended up with a residential program, which we did not expect. And then finally, I think that there's an opportunity to strengthen the capacity of municipalities and residents to better take on and maintain GSI projects.
All right, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you again to our panel presenters, who not only have given us, our students in the audience, a great model for the kinds of professional roles that you can take on to address some of these problems, but also for giving the community members in our audience some ideas of solutions and how people are out there addressing these things on a local level. So I want to take a couple of minutes to ask some questions that I have to the panel, and they're not addressed to any specific panelists, so I will open it up to whoever wants to respond. And then after I've asked a few questions, we'll open it up to the audience. So as we're going through the first set of questions, you can think about your own questions. So my first question that I had was really around, all of you talked a little bit about funding in your presentations, and you've been the head of the EPA working with a federal budget, and you spent a lot of time looking at potential monies available for infrastructure projects, and as a consultant, I'm sure you're also thinking about where the funding is going to come that these municipalities then use to pay the consultants. So I'm kind of curious because right now we're also seeing a lot of uncertainty. There have been these federal funding freezes. I haven't been paying attention to the news today, so I don't know what's happening with our congressional budget. But I am curious, this is focused on local solutions, but a lot of those dollars seem to come from federal. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about how you see the balance of local governments compared to federal governments in preparing for some of these climate change impacts, and how especially this is shifting under our current federal administration.
I was on the board of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, which is the very large stormwater and wastewater utility here in Cook County for almost 15 years. And the Water Reclamation District received authority from the Illinois General Assembly in 2005, I believe, for stormwater management. Prior to that, it only dealt with sewage. But it got a lot of complaints about flooding because of the combined pipes and so on. And the Cook County government previously had that authority for stormwater management and just wasn't doing much with it. So Water Reclamation District gets that authority and some additional taxing authority from the General Assembly and has been using that money to initially commission some detailed watershed plans in Cook County, to do some regional projects, larger detention ponds and reservoirs and so on. And then in 2014 realized we need to be working more in communities, not just regionally, and received that authority through some legislative action, and now is working with communities to have them develop stormwater master plans, to provide technical assistance. It has a buyout program and has already worked with municipalities and willing homeowners who have repeated flooding to buy out some homes. And there's a requirement that nothing would be developed on those parcels once those homes are removed. So the Water Reclamation District is spending, I think, between about $70 and $100 million a year from the taxing authority that it has on stormwater work in Cook County. I also learned that they've been doing some innovative work with the Forest Preserve District of Cook County that can maybe jointly purchase additional lands that can be restored to capture more stormwater, but also provide recreational opportunities for fishermen and bikers and boaters. And they've been doing some of this work in the Thorn Creek and Deer Creek areas of southern Cook County. And they're interested in doing something similar with the Park District. My point is that I think there are opportunities for collaboration with municipalities, counties, townships, as well as the state and the feds to work on projects together.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because certainly we've had a huge influx, still not enough, but over the last 4 years, a huge influx in federal funds. And as a regional government and then also working with counties and local municipalities, we know we weren't prepared for the deluge of funding that we received. And to be prepared, you need to have the plans in place, you need to have the studies conducted, and no doubt there's still money, real money needed for that kind of work. But fortunately, it's a little bit cheaper than actually building the infrastructure. And so I think that while I don't know what the exact federal versus state and local split is, certainly, as Anna's pointed out, there's these solutions really need to be community driven, and the magnitude of the problem really requires us to think holistically about what those solutions are, and so we need to plan holistically for those solutions. And so I think there's a lot that can be done at that level right now. I mean, here I am trying to lift up the urban planning field and the work that we do at CMAP, of course, but I think that we need to get smarter about how we plan for the future, and importantly, break down the silos that exist between public works and engineering and planning, community development, economic development, so that we're really, and bringing in, of course, residents and other community leaders, so that we can address these solutions together and make sure that when we are going to repave a road, we're taking that opportunity to see what kind of green stormwater infrastructure improvements can be built into that. And of course, there's like complex web of coordination that's needed to line up the design work, the timelines, the funding, all of that's necessary. And I think that now is a good time for us to focus on that. But I mean, no doubt, without the federal funds, we're going to be doing less. We're going to see less construction, because that certainly is a really important source of funding that really everyone in the region relies on.
Can I add just one other thing? This is a gnarly issue in terms of funding, because the Water Reclamation District is supported through property taxes, not through fees for services it charges, except for industrial users. So if I, as a homeowner, want to rip up my driveway and replace it with a permeable surface, and thus send 10,000 gallons a year fewer to be treated by the district can't give me a break on my property taxes as a kind of incentive to do that. But I think we want to try to explore some innovative funding mechanisms to incentivize those homeowners or those communities that want to take joint action and capture water where it falls and keep it out of the sewers and things like that. So there's an opportunity for all of you to do some creative thinking and work with your local governments.
Yeah, if I can add to that, one of the things that we've been able to do is, instead of looking at like federal funding sources that we might be looking at normally, we have been prioritizing looking at more private sources of funding, and we're actually working with a few foundations that are supporting continuations of the projects that I just talked about. We're building off of them, more of like what Kate was getting to, the like planning level type work versus, infrastructure implementation. But those private foundations are helping to keep things moving forward in the meantime.
All right, so yes, bleak on the infrastructure, but we do have other sources of funding, so that's good. My next question is something that you started to address there, maybe, Deborah, in your last response, and I'm sort of curious, you've addressed kind of the issues that we're seeing, but I'm wondering if in terms of the research and policy, you can help clarify what are some of the biggest gaps? What is the research that still needs to be done to understand how best to address these issues? And that can be science-based research or also policy-based research to explore these issues.
Great question. I think if you want to have a guaranteed job, do something with water. Design water saving appliances. One place where I think there's a need for research is soil types. And because it makes a big difference in terms of agriculture, nutrient loading, whether soils are more porous and absorptive or more compacted. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for work there. Certainly, I mentioned but didn't expand on, I see a need for what I would call a distributed network of rain capture systems. A rain barrel can hold 55 gallons, but there are large cisterns that can hold 12,000 gallons. And I'd love to see a cluster of homes that are all connecting their roofs to a communal cistern that then can release water for irrigation or into the sewer system or into a rain garden, the sewer system when it can use it. Somebody shared an idea with me of repurposing older rail tank cars that used to transport oil that no longer are being allowed to because they're transitioning to double-hulled cars. Well, a tank car can hold 20 or 30,000 gallons of fluid, of liquid, whether it's oil or water. You could position those next to a big box store or a big warehouse, capture the rain off of a roof, have smart telemetry that tells you when a storm is coming and make sure that it's emptied out so you know what capacity you had distributed around a neighborhood. You could sink it halfway buried in a park and build slides and climbing gyms and stationary bicycles to help empty it. And so I'd like to just, be much more creative and innovative in how we think about neighborhood scale rain capture systems.
I guess on the more policy side of things, I don't have an immediate answer, but I'm currently on a team that's working with the city of Chicago on their upcoming GSI strategy plan. And so we're doing a lot of like best practices research, and because municipalities really like to see what other municipalities are doing. And so I think best practices research, but also like long-term performance of existing GSI is a needed area of research in this space. GSI is relatively newer. I think there was like an inflection of adoption back in like the 2010s. But there hasn't really been a chance to see how they're performing long term, particularly with maintenance being a concern. There's probably good opportunities for cross-disciplinary research collaborations, both on what makes a system effective, but also how do you design it in a way that has that easy to maintain and has that workforce development aspect that can tie into a project. So I think tying research with implementation is a great opportunity area.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the costs, the economic gains, quantifying. I know there's been work in this area, but we're going to have to continue to beat the drum that investments in sustainable infrastructure and green infrastructure will pay dividends in long run in the future. And so, especially I think in the current climate where there's a shift towards the way that we used to build infrastructure, going back decades. I think there just continues to be some skepticism that the benefits of going towards green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure really pan out from an economic perspective. And I think you have to look at it over the lifespan of the infrastructure as well, or take into account the upfront costs, but also the costs of significant maintenance or replacement that's going to be needed at some point in the future. So more work around like building those case studies, building up that body of research to really help equip planners and engineers and policymakers to be able to continue to make that economic argument. And the cost of inaction.
Okay, I do want to open it up for the audience's questions, but so I just want to ask one last question. I am a big believer in not starting from scratch and launching your own independent investigation into something where other people have already been doing this work. So I'm wondering if you each could maybe share one or two local organizations or individuals who are really champions of responding to the climate impacts on water resources in our region.
The Center for Neighborhood Technology does a lot of really amazing work, particularly in the data analytics space related to water and the impacts of urban flooding.
Well, in researching my presentation, I talked with an engineer at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District who's working on stormwater, and he told me they have extensive GIS data sets, and I don't know if Loyola has an agreement with MWRD, but I think there's great collaborative opportunities for students to look at an area of the city and partner with the district on coming up with imaginative plans and things like that. So that's one idea.
There's so many people in this room right now. I mean, we have Cheryl Watson here, who has been a known name in this work for at least a decade more. Alliance for the Great Lakes as well is here. And Friends of the Chicago River is doing some really great work in this space. And of course, anyone who's interested in using data, policy research, and other work that CMAP has put out, if you have any questions, please reach out to me.
Okay, I'm going to close out my portion of asking questions and open it up to the audience for your questions for our panel.
I'm really impressed with what J.B. Pritzker is doing at the state level, and not so much about water, but about climate change. And I know also that he's starting get the lead out to switch out water pipes that deliver drinking water to homes. And I love the conversation that you've been having and the thinking that it seems like you're doing right here on this little stage about how can different organizations collaborate together. So, like ripping up all the city after city after city, ripping up all of the streets to place new drinking water delivery into these homes would be a great opportunity to then also try to mitigate some of the flooding happening in the same neighborhoods. I just wondered if any of you are there any discussions at a higher level and maybe with the state that include the city of Chicago and all of our neighborhoods in this project?
I don't know if I can speak to specific examples, but I do know that there is some good collaboration happening at the state between IEPA, that's involved with the drinking water and water quality, as well as IDNR, that gets involved with flood mitigation. I think a lot of this coordination also happens at the very local level. It's your, village or city developing a capital improvement plan that's laying all of these improvements out together. I think where it gets challenging is the funding source, the shiny thing over there, we seek that, and then we lose that opportunity to think a bit more long-term about how we can actually program out that money and use it most effectively.
I wanted to, I guess this is a comment and a question, thematically across all of the talks, there's a lot of discussion around centering community input and centering what homeowners or individuals could do in their blocks and neighborhoods and so on and so forth. But one of the things that I feel like I haven't heard enough of is the role of private industry in all of this. And different agencies, whether at the city, state level, do have some leverage when it comes to private industry, whether it's through permitting or funding, whatever the case may be. What are some opportunities that are there that we can use that leverage to implement or require that private industry have a decentralized stormwater capture system as part of a development, use permeable surfaces for their parking lots, have all of these things? How are there examples that we can, point to, since we love seeing what other people are doing, around how we're also holding private industry accountable and not only putting the onus on those individuals with lived experiences or that are in the front lines of all of this happening?
Great question. The city of Chicago has a stormwater management ordinance that requires new developments to manage a certain percentage of their stormwater in those using techniques. Not all of it is solely green, but that is something that we are talking about a lot as part of our GSI strategy with Department of Environment at the city right now. So there's that permitting mechanism. I think the city of Milwaukee is doing a lot of really awesome work. The Metropolitan Sewerage District in that area has spent 10 years or so doing outreach and building a lot of momentum around GSI, and has a really actually popular grant program where they do some work with those private industry sites to install GSI on those locations.
Also thinking about a pilot program that that MWRD initiated called Storm Store, and it's very complicated. And I don't have my elevator pitch, but essentially, because there's a stormwater, a watershed ordinance, same thing within Cook County, suburban Cook, right? Because Chicago has its own. If you meet a certain development threshold, you have to then make sure that you're providing the adequate stormwater management. And so what they found, though, is that, of course, where is development happening? It's not, redevelopment isn't happening everywhere. And so what about the communities that are most burdened by flooding and also have seen long-term disinvestment? How can you incentivize the construction, the benefits that come from that storage, that stormwater storage that's built through the private sector, and redirect some of that money to communities that really need the stormwater management? And so that was a program, or still is a program, where within a certain watershed boundary, because of course, water water follows gravity, and so it is based in science and engineering, but to be able to provide trades from a developer in an area where there may not be many stormwater needs, there may not be flooding. So how can that developer then pay money into a credit system to help fund much needed improvements in other communities? And I know it's hard to really pull off the market aspect of that. I think the pilot, those involved, they've learned a lot from it, but I think that that's important to know too, because when we just rely on private sector redevelopment opportunities, those opportunities aren't equal across the board.
Thank you. I want to turn back to a little bit of the regional work and distributed concepts. I love the idea of that. But Deborah, when I look at some of those slides, I can't help but see a patchwork quilt of building commissions and zoning boards and hyper-local ordinances that always have very specific ideas, often outdated, about how to manage that type of infrastructure. So what are the best ways for us to think about bringing those groups together in some of these solutions that you're talking about?
Well, I know that the Water Reclamation District was working through various watershed councils, various councils of governments, but for, I think, the 6 major watersheds in Cook County, and that would be a place to start. But there really, you're right, needs to be a lot of outreach, collaboration with each municipality. And they, of course, vary widely in their capacity, in their interest, in their ability to even address some of this.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for hosting this conference. I'm a resident about a mile south of here in Edgewater, and to the point of local involvement and community involvement, I've brought up green alleys and other similar infrastructure and participatory budgeting meetings in the ward I live in and the neighboring ward that I used to live in on several occasions. Because in the city of Chicago, aldermen get about, $1.5 to $2 million a year in capital project budgets that they have most control over. And every single time over the last 4 years I've brought it up, they say it's too much money. And it takes away from whatever other cool project ideas people have at these meetings. And I also see in the ground that there were some green alleys built under the Daley administration. So is it local neighborhood funding that got us the handful of green alleys we have now? And also, is that the best bang for our buck or dime for our drops of water, so to speak, that we should be advocating for as citizens? Or should we be focusing on some other technologies that might be a little cheaper than putting in and installing green alleys?
I know that the Water Reclamation District has paid for some green alley projects. I don't know if they'll do it within the city of Chicago, but worth checking. The challenge with green alleys is maintenance. They need to be maintained and sort of vacuumed once or twice a year, and that's where they have started to fail, is that at least originally it was the Chicago Department of Transportation that was all gung-ho, but then the maintenance fell to streets and sand, and they weren't as bought into the program. So need to figure out who's going to be responsible over time to make sure that they work as they were designed to do.
Yeah, I was just add quickly onto that. I agree with everything that Deborah just said, but I think that's an area for research and where like institution like Loyola could play a role for sure.
All right, thank you. Hi, so this is a big question. So in the CSI strategy, is the state planning on, like for instance, if because a lot of people are wasting water in the state of Illinois, are there any plans in the strategy to potentially charge more or add more restrictions, like price restrictions, like for instance, if you use too much, you have to pay more, that way to kind of control this problem? Because I feel like that should definitely be something considered. So I'm curious, what are your, is that part of the strategy?
Yeah, we're in really early stages of the strategy, like data collection right now, trying to get all the city departments to be willing to share their data, which is a challenge in of itself. So right now, some of the policies that other places have done that we might investigate are like a stormwater fee, public-private partnership programs, like the city of Milwaukee has. So we don't have like exact things yet that we're investigating, but please come out to our public meetings in May and provide your input.
To add on that, I mean, yeah, once you have to start paying for something, then you're much more acutely aware of what you're spending. I know that, just to talk a little bit more about the stormwater fee, someone I work with likes to say, you know, that is the service in many communities. It's a service that everyone is benefiting from. Well, some more than others, because we've been talking about flooding a lot today. But in many places, it's not charged for. So that those funds come directly from the general funds of the municipality. And guess what? Or like the aldermanic funds too. And we know that they are in short supply, and we have sidewalks that need to get repaired, or sidewalks that we don't even have and that we need. And so I know that the topic of an additional fee, it's really hard to get the political will and the support to get behind, and it needs to be done equitably, because some people can pay more than others. But on the topic of private industry too, yeah, exactly. Perfect case example where you actually build out your fee structure so that the commercial businesses, the industrial businesses are really paying their fair share. And then you could have a flat fee for all residential. You could have it tied to your impervious surface, like Deborah showed in the example of the mini McMansions going up on her block. And so, you know, we're not gonna, especially if we just rely on federal funding, which we're not, but we know that we need to generate more local sustainable streams of funding. And there are ways, and we can look to our neighbors in Wisconsin and elsewhere across the country and see how to do it equitably, and then try to make some forward movement so that we actually have funds that start to meet the need of the problem.
All right, we'll take this opportunity to close things up for our panel. Let's give our panelists one more round of applause for their great answers. And I also wanted to take this opportunity, because this is a special year for our climate change conference. This is our 10th climate change conference here at Loyola that we've hosted on an almost annual basis. And we have our founding dean, Nancy Tuckman, to thank for the existence of this conference, and we have her leadership to thank for its ongoing success, for bringing all of us together in this room year after year. And this is also her last year as our dean. You may have seen the announcement this week that we have a new dean coming in July. So I wanted to take this moment especially to appreciate the fact that we have had this conference for 10 times over the course of the history of SES, and I really especially want to thank Nancy Tuckman for her leadership. This conference would not be possible without her leadership.